An answer to the question, what is enlightenment, by Immanuel Kant. Enlightenment is the human being's emancipation from its self-incurred immaturity. So basically, हमारी immaturity. Now, immaturity is something that we already know about. We are familiar with the concept of it. Basically, we call somebody immature when they don't act according to their particular age, and they don't act according to the standards of the society, that the society expects them to act as as per their age. Of course, like the society doesn't expect a 10-year-old to go out and work and earn money. So you cannot really call a child immature if he or she is not working or not earning money. So it's basically, immaturity is when you don't act up to the standards, expected standards, maybe according to your age, maybe according to your weight, maybe according to your intelligence, according to the standards of the society. So enlightenment is basically human beings' emancipation, that is freedom from the self-incurred immaturity. Now, immaturity is the inability to make use of one's intellect without the direction of another. This immaturity is self-incurred when its cause does not lie in a lack of intellect, but rather in a lack of resolve and courage to make use of one's intellect without the direction of another. So basically, ये immaturity हमारी self-incurred इस reason की वजह से है क्योंकि हमारे पास वो काम करने का intellect है. We understand that something is important. We understand how to do it. We know the know-hows, everything of that particular work. But we are immature when we don't have the required courage or resolve to do that particular work. So have the courage to make use of your own intellect. Now, an example of immaturity can be, there's a 35-year-old, say, man who is well-read, well-studied, good education, everything, completed all his studies, everything, and is still unemployed. Is still dependent on the parents for his living, for his everything. He is not earning money by himself. That will be immaturity, because that person has the intellect to work. That person just doesn't have the resolve and the courage to go and earn money, to act according to the intelligence that he carries. He has the intelligence, he has the intellect to go and work, to earn money. But that person is not using his intellect just because he doesn't have the resolve and the courage to do so. Is hence the motto of enlightenment. So basically, enlightenment will mean when you stop being immature in the simplest of terms. Idleness and cowardice are the reasons why such a large segment of humankind, even after nature has long since set it free from foreign direction, is nonetheless content to remain immature for life. And these are also the reasons why it is so easy for others to set themselves up as their guardians. So what Kant is telling us is that the reason why we very often fall prey to being the subjects of others, like how Indians were a colony of the British for a very long time. So the reason why different countries, different groups set themselves as the masters of other people is because of two reasons: idleness and cowardice. Idleness, when you don't have the resolve to do something, when you don't work hard, when you don't live up to your intellect, live up to your hard work, live up to your capability. Cowardice, again, when you don't have the courage to stand up for yourself, to work. So basically, resolve and courage ka opposite, idleness and cowardice. When people don't live up to their capabilities is when people let others be their masters, because they're simply not using their capability. They have all the resources to be somebody, to do something, to do some work, but they simply just sit in all idleness, in all cowardice. They don't have the courage, they don't have the resolve, the work hard mindset to go and work and stand up for themselves. So it is so comfortable to be immature. It is. it is very, very comfortable. It's very easy to be immature. If I have a book that reasons for me, a pastor who acts as my conscience, a physician who determines my diet for me, etc., then I need not make any effort myself. So here we see that there are so many different things, all of those things. There's a pastor who would work and act as his conscience, a physician who would determine the diet of the person and take care of the health and everything. The point here is that it's very easy to let go of yourself, to not work hard upon yourself and work hard for others. So it's very easy to just let go of everything, do nothing, sit idly in all cowadice, and just enjoy and spend your time off not doing anything productive. It is very easy doing that. But that is one of the reasons why other people become the masters of us. Why we are enslaved by other people, just because we don't have the courage, we don't have the work hard mindset, and we don't start working for ourselves. It is not necessary that I think if I can just pay, others will take such irksome business upon themselves for me. The guardians who have kindly assumed supervisory responsibility have ensured that the largest part of humanity, including the entirety of the fair sex, understands progress toward maturity to be not only arduous but also dangerous. After they have first made their domesticated animals dumb and carefully prevented their tame creatures from daring to take a single step without the walker to which they have been harnessed, they then show the danger that threatens them should they attempt to walk alone. Yet this danger is not so great, for they would, after falling a few times, eventually learn to walk alone. But one such example makes them timid and generally deters them from all further attempts. So here he is trying to give us an example. He is trying to make us understand something. What happens is, the first, when the animals were domesticated, wild animals, how they were domesticated, and a time comes when they were tamed to the extent that the animals would not even take one step without their masters. Why? Because they're afraid of getting beaten up, afraid of getting everything done and all that stuff. And they have this mindset, then they this thing that forms in their mind is that it is not possible for them to take even a few steps without their master. Where the problem lies is that they will have to start doing it eventually. They will have to start walking. Even if they fall, it's okay to fall a few times, but ultimately there will come a point where they will be able to walk by themselves. Okay, so what they mean here is that it may seem sometimes that it's not possible to do something without the help of some other thing, without the help of some other being. So it is possible, and it happens to us so many times that we are just, I don't know how to do it. I can't do it on my own. I need the help of this person. I need this. I need that in my life. It's just, for example, it's so much set in our mindset today that we cannot go anywhere without a mobile phone. We are dependent on mobile phones, on the electronics so much that we are not able to work for ourselves. But this is not true. We just have to break free from that shackle. We just have to break free from that bondage that captures our mind, that it does not allow us to do anything for ourselves. We're so heavily dependent on other things and other beings. It is thus difficult for any individual to work himself out of the immaturity that has almost become second nature to him, because we are so habitual of that immaturity that it has become a second nature to us. It has ingrained with us, with our personality, with our soul. It is like we won't be able to live without this immaturity. He has even become fond of it and is, for the time being, truly unable to make use of his own reason, because he has never been allowed to try it. So very simply, they've told us that there comes a point when we are so much habitual of that immaturity that we don't even try it. We don't even try to act mature. We don't even try to break free from something and try doing something ourselves, because actually the immaturity has enslaved us. We slowly became habitual of that immaturity, and then there comes a point when we grow to love that immaturity. We have become fond of it. statutes and formulae, those mechanical tools of a rational use, or rather misuse, of his natural endowments, or are the shackles of a perpetual state of immaturity. And whoever would throw them off would nonetheless make only an uncertain leap over even the narrowest ditch, because he is not used to such freedom of movement. Hence, there are only very few who have succeeded through their own intellectual toil in emerging from immaturity who still walk confidently. It is much more likely that an entire public should enlighten itself. Indeed, it is nearly unavoidable if one allows it the freedom to do so. For there will always be some independent thinkers, even among the appointed guardians of the great masses, who, after they themselves are thrown off the yoke of immaturity, will spread the spirit of rational appreciation of one's own worth and the calling of every human being to think for himself. So that will happen every time in every age, whenever there is one thing or the other that tries to enslave us. Okay, and it's not just the talk about other people. There are so many different things. Today, can we not say that we are almost slaves of technology? We cannot go anywhere without a mobile phone. We are so heavily dependent on these machines, on these technological advances working for us, that we have almost become we have been enslaved by these machines. But what happens is that in every age there are people who have thrown that immaturity away, and not only have they themselves conquered that immaturity, but they are also spreading the message to others that even you should conquer upon your immaturity. Now here, when we are talking about immaturity, when we're talking about these things, it's just not that immaturity means acting foolishly. Immaturity is not acting according to your standards or age or whatever it is. Immaturity basically means when you're not living up to yourself, living up to your own capabilities. You have your own intellect, you have your own power, but immaturity is not using that intellect to the proper power, to the proper measure, not using that intellect as it is capable of. Today we hear so many cases, okay, I'm addicted to the phone, I can't leave Instagram, I can't leave WhatsApp, I have to be on the phone 24/7. I have become addicted to it. Why is this so? Our intellect has the power to do so much more, and yet we are enslaved by these technological things and what Instagram and Facebook and all of these things. What is particularly noteworthy here is that the public that had previously been placed under this yoke may compel its guardians themselves to remain under this yoke if it is incited to such actions by some of its guardians who are incapable of any enlightenment. So harmful is it to instill prejudices, for they ultimately avenge themselves on their originators or on those whose predecessors invented them. Hence, the public can only slowly arrive at enlightenment. A revolution is perhaps capable of breaking away from personal despotism and from avaricious or power-hungry oppression, but it can never bring about a genuine reform in thinking. Instead, new prejudices will serve as a guiding rein for the thoughtless masses. So what will happen is, every time, if we become unaware of our power, if we become unaware of our capabilities, of our intellect, every time there will be a new guardian. A few years ago, or almost a century ago, it were the Britishers. They were our guardian. They made themselves the masters of us. They started controlling us. Today it is something else. Tomorrow it will be something else. Until and unless we realize the power that we ourselves hold within ourselves, and until and unless we put that to use, proper use, until then there will always be a guardian for us. There will always be someone or something that will guide us, that will master us. Yet nothing but freedom is required for enlightenment. And indeed, it is the most harmless sort of freedom that may be properly called freedom, namely, to make public use of one's reason in all matters. Now, there are so many different definitions of freedom. What is freedom? How does it work? What should be the limit of freedom? So many different questions about it, so many different discussions about it. But what is actually freedom? So Kant explains in simplest of terms that freedom is nothing but to publicly use one's reason. Okay, you have your rationale, you have your reason, you have your intellect with you. All you have to do is use it freely. When you publicly use your intellect, your reason, and your rationale in all the matters, where you are using your own reason in every matter of your life, that is when you're actually free. That is what true freedom means. But now I hear called out on all sides, do not argue. The officer says, do not argue, just drill. The tax collector says, do not argue, just pay. The clergyman says, do not argue, just believe. There is only one master in the world who says, argue as much as you like and about whatever you like, but obey. Everywhere here there are limitations to freedom. So now, of course, what he is trying to say is that freedom basically means that you can use, or you have to use, your own reason, your own intellect in every matter of your life. But today what has happened? We are not free. We are being told by the government to pay taxes. We go to a hotel, we go to a restaurant, we eat food, and we have to obey by the hotel's rule of the service tax. Okay, every hotel, every restaurant puts some amount of money in, as their service tax and their service money. So we don't really need to give it, but it's just that we are not free today. We are being directed, our actions are being directed, we are being told what to do, what not to do, and this is not freedom. Everywhere there are limitations to freedom. But what kind of limitation is a hindrance to enlightenment, and what kind of limitation is not, but rather even serve to promote it? Now, further on in this write-up, we are going to discuss that it's not really necessary all limitations are bad. There are some places, there are some instances when these limitations are needed. But then we will discuss different kinds of limitations. What kind of limitations hinder our enlightenment, and what kind of limitations are necessary to promote our enlightenment? I answer, the public use of one's reason must be free at all times, and this alone can bring about enlightenment among humans. The private use of one's reason may often, however, be highly restricted, without thereby especially impeding the progress of enlightenment. I answer, the public use of one's reason must be free at all times, and this alone can bring about enlightenment among humans. The private use of one's reason may often, however, be highly restricted, without thereby especially impeding the progress of enlightenment. So basically, one thing is very, very important for enlightenment, and that is freedom. And how one achieves that freedom is through public use of one's reason. The private use of one's reason may often, however, be highly restricted, without thereby especially impeding the progress of enlightenment. Now, what happens is, when he's talking about the public use of reason, he's talking about what one makes thereof as a scholar before the reading world. And for the private use of reason, one may make of it in a civil post or office with which one is entrusted. If we first discuss about private use of reason, by private use of reason, one means to say that what Kant means to say is that you are entrusted with some post or with some power with you. Okay, there's an office, you're the boss of that office, and what decisions you make, that you solely make, without regarding the rules, regulations of the office or anything for some other purpose, that is what is private use of reason. That there is a position given to you, a responsibility given to you, and how you're using that responsibility and making decisions based on it. Now, public use of reason. By public use of reason, he means one which does not contain any biases. It's just public use of reason means that it's like you don't know anything about anything, and you're looking at everything from a very fresh perspective, without a historical perspective. Look, what happens is, when we have a historical perspective to anything, okay, when we know the history of something, we definitely have opinions about it. There is not one thing possible that you know about and you don't have any perspective or any bias against it. When you have information about anything, okay, be it any religions, be it any races, any ethnic groups, any country, anything, whenever we have a history of something, the backdrop of it, the information of something, institution, group, anything, we definitely have a bias against it. Okay, for example, you are passing through a store and you saw a bag, okay, and you immediately liked that bag. Okay, now later on you come to know that that bag was made of suppose say by killing 10 cows, and that one bag was made from the skin of those cows. Now when you have information regarding it, no matter how pretty the bag is, you automatically have a feeling that this is not a good bag, or I should not buy this bag because this bag is a result of killing of 10 cows. So when you have information about something, when you have a historical perspective of something, you will have a bias against it. You may like it or you may not like it. And the point is, while making decisions, while making rules, laws, regulations, you have to ensure you have no bias against it. Even if you like that thing, that's not a problem, but that is a kind of bias that will hinder from you making the correct or the appropriate laws and decisions needed in that place. Okay, so like a scholar before the reading world, for many affairs that serve the interest of the Commonwealth, a certain mechanism is required, by means of which some members of the Commonwealth must play only a passive role, so that they can be led by the government in the pursuit of public ends by means of an artificial unanimity, or at least be kept from undermining these ends. Now, for the many affairs that serve the interest of the Commonwealth, a certain mechanism is required. This is something that you're going to notice furthermore, that whether you study Locke, whether you study Rawls, there are different philosophers. They will talk about justice, freedom, equality, all of those things. But somewhere you will find that they are talking about a common mechanism, a kind of a civil government which is needed for the interest of the Commonwealth. That there has to be one, unbiased body that has to be followed. And that is one kind of limitation. Okay, for example, I told you that when we are paying the tax, we don't want to pay the tax. Okay, but even if you are buying anything, you're buying a house for yourself, you're buying a property, you're buying a car, you're buying the smallest of things. Even if you're buying a chocolate, you're paying a tax to the government. Now that is not freedom, because you don't actually want to pay the tax, but you won't get the chocolate until and unless you pay the tax. But that kind of freedom, that kind of hindrance to freedom is necessary, because if that will not be there, there won't be a Commonwealth existing. Everybody will not be able to exist peacefully. Okay, so a certain mechanism is required by means of which some members of the Commonwealth must play only a passive role, so that they can be led by the government in the pursuit of public ends. That means there has to be some people who have to take a back step, who have to obey the order of somebody who has taken an active role in that, in working of that mechanism. So some people will have to take a back step, and somewhere they will have to obey and follow the rules and regulations made by that one specific group of people. And only then will a Commonwealth be able to work in everybody's interest. In these cases, of course, one may not argue, but rather must obey. So here we see that before, Kant was giving us an example, that it said that, they will only say that you just have to obey, you cannot argue. But there are some places that you should not do it. You must obey it, you should obey it. And why should you do it? Is because it's not only for your own good, but for the greater good, for the good of the Commonwealth. And for that, some hindrance, some limitation to your freedom is also needed. To the extent that this part of the machine is simultaneously a segment of the entire commonwealth and even a part of the society of citizens of the world, and thus acts in his capacity as a scholar who addresses the public through his writings, he can indeed argue without thereby impairing the affairs for which he is in part responsible through passive service. It would thus be very harmful if an officer who receives orders from his superiors were to publicly question the expediency or usefulness of his orders he must obey. So of course, it will really shaken up the system. There are some things, there are some places, some rules that has to be obeyed by everyone. Just think of it, you stop paying taxes tomorrow. Okay, all kinds of taxes, because you say that this is a hindrance to your freedom, this is limiting your freedom, you are not free to make a decision on your own of not paying a tax. From tomorrow, you don't pay a tax. Now what will happen is, you don't pay a tax, and the government won't be able to make certain things for the whole good. The government won't be able to construct public transport, construct roads, public transport, public services, and won't be able to even distribute it and give it to those who are really in need of it. So there has to be a certain kind of a working mechanism, a kind of a civil government which will regulate everything. A citizen cannot refuse to pay the taxes which are required of him. Even a presumption public rebuke of such levies, if such taxes are to be paid by him, can be punished as causing a public scandal. Regardless of this, the same citizen does not contravene his civic duty if he publicly expresses as a caller his thought against the impropriety of even injustice of such levies. Now there are two things here. The citizen has the right, the citizen can write as much as he wants against the taxes through different mediums. The citizen can write a book, the citizen can publish in magazine, in newspapers, can write a blog, can shoot a vlog, can do anything against the taxes. The citizen has the right to have an opinion, to express his views that these taxes that are being taken from us are very wrong or very high, they should not be taken. But that doesn't mean that the person stop paying the taxes. That would be wrong. The person has to pay the taxes, then he can express his views, he can write about that these taxes, these levies, what are levied upon people are not right. And the consequences of those writings, if they produce to be that the removal of those taxes, that is when the correct way or correct order of bringing about a change in society would be. In precisely such a way, a clergyman is bound to render his service to his pupils in catechism and his congregation in accordance with the symbol of the church that he serves, for he has been accepted into his position under precisely this condition. But as a scholar, he enjoys full freedom and is called upon to communicate to the public all of his own carefully examined and well-intentioned thoughts on what is mistaken in that symbol, as well as his suggestions for a better arrangement of the religious and church associated institutions. So if there's a father of a church, a clergyman, it's not only about a church, but even we have the Hindu pundits. Okay, all of those people, they have been given that position because of a certain reason under a condition, and the condition is the spread of that religion or the spread of that idea or being a representative of that idea. The father, for example, the clergyman, for example, cannot just stop giving his sermons and all those speeches and everything. What he can do is, he can suggest what changes need to come with these. What are the different practices one needs to inculcate in their lives for the development of their own self. So they may propose, they may express their views regarding something. That doesn't mean that they just stop doing that particular activity, because that will be a disobedience of the rules. And there is nothing here which should be regarded as weighing on his conscience. So if, for example, a person is writing about how these taxes are wrong, they should be removed, that doesn't mean he is doing something wrong. That is his right, and he has the freedom to express his views publicly. And that is why we cannot really put him on his conscience that okay, that person is paying the taxes and still talking badly about it, that the taxes should not be paid, because the person is fulfilling his or her duty. Today this is the rule that tax has to be paid, so you must obey the rule. You're expressing your views that the tax is wrong, the taxes should be removed, and if that day comes that the taxes are actually removed, that is when you can stop paying the tax. But until and unless it is a rule, you must obey it. For what he teaches in accordance with his office as a representative agent of the church, he understands to be something with regard to which he may not merely teach at his own discretion, but rather which he has been employed to present according to instruction and in the name of other. So the father or the clergyman may not personally, on his own level or independently, ever say what he was going to say in the sermon. But since he has been appointed as the father of the church or as the clergyman of the church, he is responsible for the spread of the ideas or for the conveyance of those ideas. He has been instructed to do so, and he must obey those rules. He has to follow it, he has to obey it, and he has to give sermons accordingly. He shall say, our church teaches this or that, this is the evidence that it relies upon. He then derives all practical benefits for his congregation from statutes, which he will not himself endorse with full conviction, but the presentation of which he can undertake. For it is after all not completely impossible that truth lies hidden within it, and in any case, however, nothing can be found in it that fundamentally contradicts the inner religion. For if he believed to find such a contradiction therein, he would not be able to execute his office in good conscience and would have to resign from it. So if somewhere you believe that, if you're as a citizen of the country, you believe that what the government is doing is wrong, and the taxes that the government is paying, the government is asking for the people to pay are absolutely wrong, and then you stop paying the taxes, that is wrong. You have to pay the taxes. You have to keep paying the taxes till the time you are a citizen of that country. You will have to obey and abide by all the rules and regulations, all the laws that have been made and other persons in the country follow. However, you may not agree with the idea. You can publicly express them through writings also. And if you really want to stop paying the taxes, there are other ways then. You will have to either stop working, stop buying things, which is practically not possible. You will have to leave the country then. You cannot just stop paying the taxes being a citizen of the country. That would be wrong. Hence, the use that an employed teacher makes of his reason before his congregation is merely a private use thereof, because this is always merely domestic assembly of persons. However large it may be, and in view of that he is not free as a priest, and indeed may not be free because he is acting on a commission that comes from outside. As a scholar, on the other hand, who through writings addresses the true public, namely the entire world, the clergyman, when making public use of his reason, enjoys unrestricted freedom in making use of his reason and in speaking from his own person. For to claim that the guardians of the people should themselves be mature in an inconsistency that would amount to a perpetuation of inconsistencies. So when talking about a public use of reason and a private use of reason would mean that you're in a certain position and you have to follow the rules and regulations of that certain position. If you don't agree with it, just quit from that position. But you cannot do that. Being in that position, you are disobeying the rules that one in that position needs to follow. But should not as a society of clergymen, for instance, a church, assembly, or a vulnerable classics, as it calls itself from the Dutch, be entitled to commit by means of oath among themselves to a certain unchangeable symbol, in order to thereby ensure themselves of constant guardianship over each of their members, and thereby over the entire population, and even immortalize their guardianship? I say that is completely impossible. Such a contract which is concluded in order to prevent for eternity all further enlightenment for the human race is quite simply null and void, even if it were to be confirmed by the most supreme authority, by means of parliaments, or by the most ceremonious of peace treaties. But should not a society of clergymen, for instance, a church assembly, or a venerable classis, be entitled to commit by means of oath among themselves to a certain unchangeable symbol, in order to thereby ensure themselves of constant guardianship over each of their members and thereby over the entire population, and even immortalize their guardianship, I say that is completely impossible. Such a contract which is concluded in order to prevent for eternity or for the enlightenment for the human race is quite simply null and void, even if it were to be confirmed by the most supreme authority by means of parliaments or by the most ceremonious of peace treaties. So no matter how high the authority is, if there is any such contract that is threatening enlightenment further, then that contract has to be rendered null and void, no matter what the authority who decides for that contract. One generation cannot form an alliance and conspire to put a subsequent generation in such a position in which it would be impossible for the latter to expand its knowledge, particularly where such knowledge is so vital to rid this knowledge of errors and more generally to proceed along the path of enlightenment. That would be a violation of human nature, the original vocation of which consists precisely in this progress, and the descendants are thus perfectly entitled to reject those resolutions as having been made in an unjust and criminal way. So what one generation cannot do is that suppose you've got to know the path of enlightenment and you just distinguish all other things, all other errors, and just take that path of enlightenment and pass it to the coming generations. That is not possible. Every age has its own errors and pros and cons and advantages and disadvantages, and they need to be tackled differently. No one generation can prefix or pre-decide for the subsequent generation. Fix a particular set of knowledge for themselves for the coming generations, that okay, this is what needs to be done, and this is what you need to do, and this is the only thing that you need to focus on, because every generation has a right to expand their knowledge. Of course it is. We see, of course, we have grown so much, and every generation is growing by some percentage, growing their intellect and growing their knowledge. The touchstone of anything that can serve as a law over a people lies in the question whether a people could impose such a law on itself. Okay, so when we ask this question, or when we decide that what is that one thing that can serve as an appropriate law, we need to consider that something that can serve as a law over people, and whether people could impose such a law on themselves also. Now this could well be possible for a certain short period of time in order to introduce a certain degree of order in anticipation of a better law. That means for a certain period of time, for a short period of time, you're introducing one law to ultimately change to a better law. For example, we saw that for 15 years Hindi and English both were to be used as a medium of communication. So this was a short-term law which was then expected to turn into a better law. By allowing every citizen, primarily the clergyman, the freedom to comment publicly, that is through writings, in his capacity as a scholar on that which is flawed in the present arrangement, while the current order still prevails, until insight into the state of affairs in these matters has publicly progressed to the point where it has shown itself to be generally accepted, such as through a coalition of their voices it could present a proposal to the throne to defend these congregations that are agreed upon what they view as a change in their religious organization that constitutes an improvement, without thereby hindering those who would rather leave things as they are. So the clergymen or any other such profession, while existing in this set of order, while existing in the present culture and also following it, one can publicly comment what are the flaws, what are the wrongdoings of the culture, but that doesn't mean that they completely neglect the culture. They have to keep following the culture, they have to be a part and an active follower of the culture, and they have to abide by their duty by the law. But with the same time, they can point out to some flaws which according to them should not be present in the should not be there in the present culture. That is how it needs to work. Okay, you cannot just stop acting according to the culture, stop abiding by all the laws, and then say that this we are not following it because it is flawed. So if there needs to be a change, the change needs to be first of all gradual, and then it needs to be consensual, that everybody else agrees with it, and then a change comes into being. Until that time, if a certain law is being practiced, if a certain tradition is being practiced, then you must abide by it. But to agree to a permanent religious constitution that is to be publicly called into question by no one, even within the space of a person's lifetime, and thereby to destroy, as it were, and render vain a span of time in humankind's progress towards improvement, and thus make it detrimental to one's descendants, is quite simply impermissible. So at one point it is that you don't have to leave out being a follower of the culture, but at the same time it doesn't also mean that you just stop pointing out the flaws, that you accept the culture as it is and as to be perfect. Okay, so it's not that you have to completely agree with one thing and you just stop blindly following it, because then in that case there will be no scope for improvement, for expansion. Everything has its own pros and cons. Everything can be flawed at one point of time. After a certain point of time, everything can be flawed, because with changing time, circumstances changes, rules change, things change, situations change, and that is why it's not necessary, like for example, one religious constitution that was made some time ago can also be followed till date. Okay, you see this, that there were we ask our elders in our home what and how they would follow their religion, and then you compare it with yours, how do you follow your religion. With time there are certain things that need to change. Okay, so it's not that we completely leave out the culture or tradition or the law, we completely stop following it, or we totally abide by it, or we blindly follow it. So both things have to go together. We follow it, and at the same time we point out the flaws and try to change them for improvement, for progress with time. A human being can postpone enlightenment for his own person, and even then only for a short time with regard to that which is his responsibility to know. But to renounce it for his own person, and more still for his descendants, amounts to violating the sacred rights of humanity and to trample them underfoot. But what a people is not able to legislate over itself, a monarch is even less entitled to decree. For this legislative standing is based precisely in the fact that he unifies in his will the collective will of the people. Okay, so if he only looks to ensuring that all genuine or supposed improvement is consistent with the civic order, then he can for the rest just let his subjects do that which they themselves find necessary to undertake for their own salvation. It does not concern him, but it is his concern to prevent one from hindering another by forceful means from working to determine and promote his own salvation with all of his own powers. So when we talk about somebody in power, as in a monarch or as in a leader or anybody with some kind of power, that person has to let the subjects, okay, or the group, or who he the lead who one of the group of which the person is a leader of. So he has to let all his subjects, I'm referring to them as subjects here, so they can be followers, citizens, anybody. We're basically talking about one person who is in charge and the others who are somewhere or the other obeying the charge. So that one person has to let all other persons do whatever it takes for them to attain their own salvation. But the only point where the monarch or the leader will interfere is when one person's salvation hinders with the other person's salvation. You can do whatever you want for your own sake, but if your processes, your methods are problematic to another person, they hinder with another person's progress, another person's salvation, that is when a monarch's role comes into play. A monarch has to stop one person from hindering the salvation or the enlightenment of the other person. You need to understand the freedom is there, but it is with a limitation. You have the freedom to do whatever you want for your own sake, but the limitation is when that freedom obstructs the freedom of the other person. That is when the freedom of that person, of the first person, has to be limited, and that is the role or the job of a monarch. That the monarch has to ensure that the other people do not hinder with the salvation of the other people, and at the same time the monarch also has to look out for his own salvation. He would even diminish his own majesty if he were to interfere here and deem writings in which his subjects seek to clarify their insights worthy of supervision by his government. This is true if he did so based on his own supreme insight, in which case he subjects himself to the objection. And it is just as true, and indeed much more so, if he lowers his supreme authority by supporting the spiritual despotism of a few tyrants in his state against his other subjects. If it is asked then whether we live in an enlightened age, then the answer is no. But we do live in an age of enlightenment. Now there's a huge difference between the two. An enlightened age and an age of enlightenment. It is far from the case that humans in present circumstances and taken as whole are already or could be put in a position to make confident and good use of their own reason in matters of religion without the direction of another. So of course, a person in today's circumstances, a human cannot be trusted upon his own will to follow a religion. There needs to be a person who guides the other people. But we have clear indications that they are now being opened up to the possibility of working towards this, that the obstacles to universal enlightenment or to the emancipation from one's self-incurred immaturity are now gradually becoming fewer. In this regard, our age is an age of enlightenment, or the century of Frederick. So we are not living in an enlightened age, but we are living in an age where we can move towards enlightenment. An enlightened age would mean that it is already done. Okay, we are already enlightened, but we are not. But we can move towards it. A prince who does not see it as beneath his dignity to say that he regards it as a duty to dictate nothing to men in matters of religion, but rather to ensure them perfect freedom in such matters, a prince who thus himself rejects the arrogant name of tolerance, is himself enlightened and deserves to be praised both by grateful world of present and by posterity as the one who first freed the human race, at least from the side of the government, from immaturity, and let everyone be free to make use of his own reason in all matters of conscience. So a leader who allows other people, who allows his subject to follow whatever they want for their own sake, who allows the subjects or the other people to follow their own conscience in matters of religion, their own choice in matters of religion. Now that kind of a person, that rulers is actually praiseworthy. Under his rule, venerable clergy may, notwithstanding the duties of their office, present in their capacity as scholars freely and publicly to the scrutiny of the world judgments that might here or there deviate from their assumed religious symbol. This is even more the case with any others who are not constrained by duties of office. So the spirit of freedom also extends outward, even to where it must struggle with the external obstacles presented by a government that misunderstands itself, for such a government is presented with evidence that granting freedom need not leave one concerned with in the least for public order and the unity of the commonwealth. Human beings will gradually work their way out of their condition of brutishness as long as one does not intentionally meddle in order to keep them in this state. Okay, so what they're talking about is that under his rule, venerable clergymen may, notwithstanding the duties of their office, present in their capacity as scholars freely and publicly to the scrutiny of the world. Okay, so under the rule of a ruler who allows every person to follow their own religious convention, however they like it to be, until and unless it hinders with the other person's salvation. Under the rule of that or of such a leader, a clergyman can, scrutinize his or her own religion, but from his own private matters, from his own private stand. This is even more the case with any others who are not constrained by duties of office. So this spirit of freedom also extends outward, even to where it must struggle with the external obstacles presented by a government that misunderstands itself. So of course there can be such institution that hinders with the freedom of people, and at places where it is not even necessary. Such a government is presented with evidence that granting freedom need not leave one concerned in the least for public order and the unity of the commonwealth. Human beings will gradually work their way out of their condition of brutishness as long as one does not intentionally meddle in order to keep them in this state. I have described the main point of enlightenment, that is, a human being's emancipation from its self-incurred immaturity, primarily in terms of religious matters. So, when Kant is talking about enlightenment, he's talking about freedom from emancipation, and he's talking about freedom, and also he's talking about your own freedom in religious matters, which is a very important topic today. For with regard to the arts and the sciences of our rulers have no interest in acting as a guardian of their subjects. Moreover, immaturity in matters of religion is the most harmful sort, and hence the most degrading of all. So yet, yes, it is considered. You see, there are some people who think that whatever their ancestors have told them to be, or taught them to be as religion, that has to be followed precisely. We see that there are people everywhere. When you bring about even the smallest of changes in religion, they would immediately stop you and tell you that this is not the right way, this is not the correct way, etc., etc. But if that kind of a thing does not hinder with your own salvation, your own enlightenment, then you should not really say anything. It is up to the person, it is up to the freedom of the person how he or she wants to practice his or her own religion. In religious matters, there is freedom until and unless it hinders with the enlightenment of the other person. So when we're talking about enlightenment, it also talks about freedom from immaturity, self-incurred immaturity. This regard to the arts and the sciences, our rulers have no interest in acting as guardians of their subjects. Moreover, immaturity in matters of religion is the most harmful sort. But the way of thinking of a head of state who encourages freedom in the former goes even further and recognizes that even with regard to his legislation, there is no danger in allowing his subjects to freely make public use of their reason and to present publicly their thoughts to the world concerning a better vision of his legislation, even by means of a candid critique. So that is what is being talked about, that you should be a part of the present culture, of the current culture. You should not just exit it, but whatever things that you think are flawed, you can express them publicly, and every person has the freedom to scrutinize it through writings, through public speech, through different mediums. But that doesn't mean that you just exit in and neglect it completely. Okay. We have a brilliant example of this, and the monarch whom we admire has no precedent. But only he who himself enlightened is not afraid of shadows, but at the same time has at his disposal a well-trained and large army for guaranteeing the public peace, can say what a free state may not dare say. Argue as much as you want and about whatever you want, but obey. Here one finds an odd and unexpected course of human events, just as one does at other times when one considers the course of human events in the large, in which nearly everything is paradoxical. A greater degree of civic freedom seems to be of benefit to the intellectual freedom of people, and yet also sets unsurpassable limitations on such freedom. A lesser degree of civic freedom, by contrast, creates room for the people to extend itself in accordance with all its powers. At one point in the article, we talked about limitations, how some limitations should not be there in freedom and how some limitations should be there. So after that point I'm telling you, we have discussed about limitations to freedom. Now this is your job, and try doing it. Try to list all the limitations that are set on freedom, and what limitations are necessary for enlightenment and what limitations are not necessary for enlightenment, and comment and tell me what do you think in the text. Read the text, see this video, read the text, and you will get the answer of what limitations are necessary and what limitations are not. So try and guess them. They are very easy, very openly they have been told about what are the limitations that are needed and what are not needed. And comment and let me know, and I'll give a shout out to the comment, and I'll pin the comment on top. So let's see how many can you find, how many limitations can you find. So a greater degree of civic freedom. It is true. Look, when we have freedom, we have it's like an open ground before us. We can do whatever we want. So there is space for creativity, a space for expansion, a space for improvement, a space for progress. So it is a greater degree of civic freedom is also a benefit to the intellectual freedom, because it gives you space to intellectually be free, to progress on every level and also at intellectual level. A lesser degree of civic freedom, by contrast, creates room for the people to extend itself in accordance with all its powers. When nature has fully developed the seed concealed in this hard casing, to which it gives its most tender care, namely the tendency and the calling to free thinking, then this seed will gradually extend its effect to the disposition of people, through which the people gradually become more capable of freedom of action, and finally even to the principles of government, which find it to be beneficial to itself to treat the human being, who is indeed more than a machine, in accordance with his dignity. So that is true. We talk about concepts like freedom, like justice, like equality, but we also have to keep in mind these concepts cannot be absolutely true. These are utopian concepts which can only be true to a certain degree. And why is that? It is because human beings are not machines. Every human being has one or the other flaw. Every human being lives in a different circumstance. Every human being has different needs. Every human beings have different goals. And this is something that we also have read in economics. For example, progress. Progress for one does not really mean progress for all. One thing that can be a progress for one person can mean the absolutely opposite for the other person. Okay, for example, the government suddenly relaxes all the taxes. Okay, you don't have to give any more tax. Now, for example, a middle income person will be very happy with it, and possibly a rich person will also be very happy with it, though it may not really affect the rich person, but the person will be happy. We don't have to give any more tax. But then, if it is progress for two sectors of the country, what about the third, the poor sector? Because the poor sector was actually benefiting from those taxes and all the public services that were being built by those taxes. And this is just one example that I can think of top of my head. There are so many different examples wherein progress for one does not really mean progress for other also. So, a human being is not a machine. A human being is flawed. Different circumstances, different goals, different progresses, different everything. And that is why even when we talk about freedom, and freedom which is very, very important for enlightenment. Why? Because freedom leads you to intellectual freedom, to expansion, to improvement and progress. And freedom somewhere leaves you to emancipation from immaturity. That freedom also is different for different people. So, of course, when talking about human life, nothing can be absolute, nothing can be 100%. Everything will be flawed at one point of time.